Thank you for joining me this morning for Smooth Breakfast on Smooth 98.1. It's 7:30 and time for us to get into Freshly Pressed 981. It's a segment of Smooth Breakfast that brings to you detailed analysis of our newspaper headlines today. We have stories from the Guardian newspaper, from the Punch, from This Day newspaper, from most of the notable dailies today. The Vanguard as well is included. Devoe, Okorie, and Tolagbe Martins are my analysts for this conversation today. Tolagbe, good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Lagos, Valentine, and Devoe.
Good morning, Devoe, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Lagos. Morning, Val. Morning, Tolagbe. Cool medical tourism. To be or not to be.
Welcome. Please join the conversation by sending us messages through WhatsApp. WhatsApp number is 0809 444 0981, 0809 444 0981. You can also send it through Twitter. Twitter handle is at Smooth981FM. Please add this hashtag Freshly Pressed 981 so I can track your messages. Devoe, let me start with you on this story. The former governor of Lagos State, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and the national leader of the All Progressives Congress, has denied calling for recruitment of 50 million youth into the Nigerian army. He made that statement and he calls it the verbal error that anybody could have slipped or anybody could slip in their statements. And I agree with him, although that raised a lot of criticism saying, oh, how are you going to suggest that 50 million Nigerians are enlisted when you have approximately 200 million Nigerians? But he corrected himself and says, no, he implied 5 million, or he wanted to say 5 million. But what are your thoughts regarding the controversy, the correction, and what it still implies?
Well, yes, as you can see, the quick reaction from the citizens and some general purpose organizations to the national leader of the APC, that's All Progressive Congress, Suwaji Bola Ahmed Tinubu's speech in Kano. This was during his 12th colloquium to mark his 69th birthday. At an aspect of what he was saying, he did mention the recruitment of about 50 million people into the police and the military and security agencies. And that soundbite was taken up and it went viral. Obviously, this is just a few days after, and he has restated that it was an error, a slip of tongue in his speech, which I think now it makes more sense as to what he was trying to say. And he was speaking about the support for the national employment and security policy. So by saying that aggressive employment into the police and the military by about 50,000, and also of the youth into infrastructural and agri-modernization initiatives would greatly help the nation. Now, funny enough, let's look at it critically. We have about 350,000 police employed at the moment, even though many of them are doing private work, and about 150,000 soldiers in the Nigerian military. So for a population of about 200 million, and even if you scale it down to 150 million, this gives you about 500,000. We are understaffed in terms of our security forces, okay? And this is a hardcore security forces. You're still speaking of the, what do they call them, the civil defense. You still have the DSS. You still have all the other agencies that support the security forces in their duty, also like the immigration and customs, etc. So he was actually very modest in his position. We actually need more than that. What his suggestion was actually in line. Now, and I would like people to actually get the point instead of missing the point and running off, chasing the red herring about what he was saying. Already there were quick reactions from the Yoruba Youth Council who, who kicked against that position. And now that he's corrected it, it is true that our security forces and our employment, because if you want to generate employment in a nation, you have to fix infrastructure. Infrastructure has that multiplier effect of running the economy from various angles, which will lead to employment of our unemployed youths.
I have a question. As the national leader of All Progressives Congress, what amount of influence does it have in governance of the present day?
Well, in actual fact, that his position is even debated, that he doesn't have a position within the APC. However, I think it's all politics. We all know the role he has played in the emergence of this government. That is well documented in history. However, the point is, does the APC take note of its own people? All right. Remember, you're elected on the basis of your party. So are these sterling positions and points that are being espoused being adhered to? And we will find out in the rest of the stories whether the APC even holds on to its own policies.
I was in a taxi yesterday, and this conversation was going on radio, and the taxi driver made a remark and said, it's only around when campaign starts that you hear Tinubu speaking that it's possibly a campaign drive that is going on. That's why he's saying this thing. So
there's no gainsaying. We know that the political moves, the juncations, and what they call the hustling and the machinations with the race towards 2023 have started. It's a free and open door to everyone and anybody to make their move. And I'm sure many people are not surprised by the movement of the colloquium to the north. It's always been in Lagos, in Kano for that point, with a governor that has also been controversial. So we expect to see people who have played a role in politics at some point aspire for more. I mean, come on, don't you want to also aspire for a position?
So essentially, you've just answered my question. Yes, he's campaigning.
He's campaigning. No, we didn't say he's campaigning, but moves are being made.
All right.
It might be him, it might be somebody else.
Tolagbe, the next story is from Punch newspaper, talking about customs and their proposal for the banning of vehicles that are over 7 years old. Sounds good. We're looking at this story, and there are some other details that talk about budgets, that talk about estimated revenue that the House is expecting from the Nigerian Customs Service. Still talking about levies, or rather duties that are paid on cars. Once upon a time, we heard a few weeks ago, a few months ago, that duty was going to be reduced to 5%. That hasn't happened, has it? Please, your thoughts on this story.
So my thoughts on this story are myriad, because I, on this very show, have talked about a story in which the Federal Road Safety said that they were going to put in all sorts of punitive issues and all sorts of bans for people who were driving poorly. And one of the things we talked about was the fact that all the cars on the road are old, but they are not old because people like driving old cars. They're old because that's what people can afford to buy, right?
Yeah.
With the duty, with the falling exchange rate, this is what your money gets you. And there is no local capacity for production. So this story is quite interesting because the House of Reps has proposed this target, right? Up from 1.4 trillion to 1.56 trillion. So almost a 200 billion increase in revenue. And they're saying this is because there was a downward review in 2020 because of the pandemic. So that's what's happened. Now, what's interesting is that the Comptroller General of Customs is saying that the ACFTA, that's the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and the WTO are going to affect the country's revenue negatively. So what they want to do to solve that problem is ban importation on cars that are older than 7 years. With this, they want to retain the target. So what is happening is it almost seems as if the House of Reps appear to be conjuring these targets out of what looks like thin air. Because, from this story, I can't tell what the baseline, where they're trying to get this kind of targets from. And that's what Customs is also saying. So Customs is saying that the committee should not raise the target. The Ministry of Finance has emergency purchased 3 mobile scanners, which will allow, and this is interesting because it's the CBN again. The CBN is always very busy. They do all sorts of intervention. So right now they're intervening in the borders, and they will be providing the scanners up to 135 of them, and I guess those will be used to determine the correct age of the car and so on.
Although the details specify that CBN is contributing 4 scanners, in addition to the scanners that are planned to be procured by the customs service.
And eventually, the plan is to have up to 135. Yes, and I'm just saying that CBN is helping again in the way that they help everybody except those trying to get, dollars.
You would say that.
So
yeah.
So they want, our own is to ensure we have roadworthy vehicles. And that is not to say we want to kill our homegrown industries. It is our hope that our own industries will begin to produce vehicles that we can afford to buy. And again, I love these statements which appear to not be based in any sort of fact or reality, because if we were competitive in production, then we would be making the cars. What is he doing about, what does he want to do about the cost of power, the cost of production, manpower, markets? I feel like there's a huge divide between reality and some of these files and spreadsheets that these people generate. So
you're right, Tolagbe, because this kind of conversation should at least instigate some thoughts towards production and not necessarily relying on the consumerist mentality, because although the customs would have to make provisions or rather suggestions based on issues under their jurisdiction, right? Things that, that concern them and not necessarily things that do not, but that's a strong point you make there. Now, looking at the next story, Devoe, it's on record that our President Muhammadu Buhari, has traveled since he was sworn in 2015. He's traveled abroad for medical checkup 6 times. The trip he made yesterday to the United Kingdom was obviously met with a lot of criticism. People saying, how can the president be traveling again for the 6th time? Yet our medical industry is suffering so much, and we are experiencing brain drain in that sector. But what are your thoughts regarding this? And from all the criticisms that have trailed his trip, what would you say is essential to our development, especially development of the health sector now, and away from, because we've been having this rhetoric,
right?
Many times over.
Which I called it rhetoric. But Val, you asked a question when we started, and this is the answer. Does the APC follow its own policy? Does Asuwaju's statements or soundbites have any influence? This is the answer in this story, which is actually the major story of the day and of the week, if not the year, with the president going off on a medical trip amid crisis within his country. One, what are the facts? And let's just speak facts so that people understand that Nigerians are not insane. This is the 6th routine medical checkup, which is what the presidency is saying is going on, that we shouldn't be in shock that he's been doing it all the time. Now, what are the issues? One, the criticism that has come forth is, despite the state of the Nigerian healthcare system, which is actually in a decrepit state, which was exposed clearly by the coronavirus pandemic, whereby you notice that we couldn't even, it was a hopeless situation of trying to address healthcare nationwide, especially during the lockdown. Now, as you remember, even private sector efforts with the CBN to COVID discovered that they literally had to rebuild medical clinics or primary healthcare centers for people to be isolated in. That's one. Secondly, Nigeria, a lot of Nigerians, due to the fact that we have lived among a failed healthcare system, have now more or less opted to be using foreign healthcare services, traveling so far 6 hours flights to different countries, and have more or less created what we refer to as medical tourism, whereby about 570 billion naira yearly leaves Nigeria on the basis or on account of payment for medical healthcare services. That's about $1.2 billion, almost the same amount that we're budgeting for a dead refinery. 3, there's been humongous brain drain. I mean, we don't even hear that word anymore. Brain drain yes, was a word used in the 80s and the 90s to symbolize how our own doctors, our own well-trained doctors, were leaving, and doctors, nurses, healthcare staff abroad to get higher salaries, to get better training, because our educational system had collapsed. and live in a better, higher standard of living, all right? Now, it's on record from a UK medical website that over 8,000 Nigerian doctors are in the UK currently. Now, PMB did promise in 2015, that's the president, that he would stop this medical flights by elected government officials, which, yes, they have implemented. But now he breaks his own policy. Why? Now, this is where the root of this problem comes. You stopped others from going, so why are you going? Now, the height of the crisis comes with the fact that whilst the presidency is trying to defend it as just routine, if it's just routine, why couldn't you have it here? About 17.3 billion was voted for the State House Clinic, all right? That was not enough for the president to say, okay, if you even wanted foreign doctors, if you didn't even like the service here, you could have imported them into the country. But it's completely bad optics. Beyond the optics, the actions that won, there is in short, they've started today, right? The resident doctor strike, which is meant to take off on the basis of poor infrastructure, outstanding salaries, and hazard allowance that hasn't been paid. Right about within the last 2 weeks, it was noted that about 1.5 billion would be arranged to resuscitate a moribund dead refinery. Now, how do you put that money available when you know that your own health facility, if we have that amount, then how come we have not been able to, within the 7 years of this administration, create a useful and adequate functional clinic for our president to use? I think the APC, and not President Buhari in this position, has a lot of questions to answer to Nigerians as to how they have been going about governance.
2 words I'd like us to contemplate on: political wheel. Patrick from Shomolu sent in a message. Devoe, thank you so much for that analysis. Patrick says on WhatsApp, "Dear freshly pressed, what a laugh. A man angling to be the next president in Nigeria is already showing signs of Alzheimer's. Can Nigeria be said, or safe rather, in his care? I don't think so." That's what Patrick says.
Come on, don't be harsh.
Fabian says, "We are indeed understaffed," and Senator Tinubu's statements, not the senator. Senator is different from the husband. All right, so let's make it clear. His statement is timely. However, I believe that we should start first by getting those already employed in the security services to stop being posted to personal protection or for personal protection of private citizens. Samuel from Lekki says, whether 50,000 or 50 million soldiers recruitment, if we continue to send in our soldiers without necessary equipment, 200 million soldiers will not be enough. On customs proposal to ban vehicles, this is very good, but why not reduce the custom duties on newer vehicles and increase them on the older ones? We have this one from Francis from Ojo. That actually seems like a plausible idea. Increase the rates on the older models of vehicles and reduce it for the newer ones. Pardon me. Francis from Ojo says, "Good morning, Valentine. Even if Tinubu meant 5 million recruitments to be done for the military, does he bother to care for them, or do they bother to care for the soldiers and policemen? Do they get better salaries or no insurance or any insurance cover for them?" It's repulsive to hear this. Thank you, Francis. We'll move on to this next one. Dele Olo says, "Good morning, Valentine and the studio guests, the analysts, Devoe and Tolagbe. It says there should be priority given to agro-industrial employment and tourism and hospitality for revenue and national productivity. Then we can finance a bigger military agency and employ more people." KB says, "Imagine what his medical visits is doing to our balance of payments." Dr. I says, "Hello, going out on a medical trip during a shambolic handling of corona pandemic and the 48 hours before a major national strike by doctors speaks volumes of the Buhari government. No new hospitals and underemployed medical staff, decayed infrastructure nationwide. I am tired." Yemi says, "A ban for cars older than 7 years, that's 2014 and above. How many Nigerians can afford this? Nigerian agencies shying away from reality. Buhari flying abroad again for medical checkup when doctors are about to go on strike, when pandemic hit so hard. Presidency is insensitive and has no plans to improve the sector. Education, health, security, all in shambles. How will Nigeria grow? Presidency has to sit up," he said. Now, let's move on to this next story. Tolagbe, Vanguard reports that Ubani writes the Attorney General and demands compliance with Judgement. Pardon me, before I get to that one, let's quickly touch on the Punch newspaper story. A Punch reports in its headline that their protests have started as Ogun dumps 1,500 casual teachers. In 2019, towards the tail end, the government of Ogun State promised to recruit these amounts of teachers. But after they received some congratulatory text messages, before they got the employment letters, COVID hit, and they paused that. The reaction from the Commissioner of Education in that state is that it's positive of funds, that's the excuse. But what are your thoughts regarding this?
Okay, so this is a big issue, and it touches on something we talked about last week when we talk about official unemployment rates versus underemployment, right? And we also talk about the fact that government remains the highest employer of labor. Without state and federal civil servants, unemployment would be even more catastrophic than it is. Most people in states outside of Lagos, it is the government's payments of salaries that drives the economy. So clearly what happened here is, and I'll say something else. Once you get a job in the civil service, it's pretty much a job for life, right? Regardless of performance, the metrics, you are there and you're entitled to your pension and, all the sort of ancillary benefits, right? So that's the advantage. It's a job for life. So what it looks like here that has happened is people, and paucity of funds is probably the polite way of saying it, which is people realize that we're about to take on this 1,500 teachers who will be stuck with forever, right? How about if in this process we provide it's so that what the offer has been a short-term 2-year contract, which I imagine, or it sounds like after that there will be conversations about who gets to stay and who gets to go. But I think the challenge is coming from the fact that it was rather haphazardly done, which is to say people had got the letters, then they got the text messages, told to pick up the appointment letter, and then this didn't work. So but I guess I can see what caused the Ogun State government to put the brakes on. It was like panic. This is going to be another 1,500 people that we are with till they are 70 and even beyond. So they are reviewing the situation. So what is happening is obviously that the commissioner wasn't able to take calls to seem to talk about it. Apparently, journalists tried to speak with him. So, protesters, there's a gentleman in Abeokuta who says, we've been waiting for this recruitment has taken almost 2 years. There's been a lack of communication. So what is clear is the process hasn't been well handled. I think if it had been better communicated that this was the change in approach, you might not have this situation. I think it's indicative of where we find ourselves sometimes, which is a situation that could be easily handled by open, and straightforward communication it becomes entangled because people just don't know how to communicate.
Yes. Because we all experienced COVID. It wasn't like it was a selection process that eliminated the governors and, focused on the populace. Everybody experienced it. So you're right. Communication, I think, is key here. Let's talk about Ubani and him writing the Attorney General demanding compliance from the Vanguard newspaper. I have a few questions. First, the court has ordered, you mentioned, I think it was Tolagbe that emphasized last time, I think, that the government adheres to judgments, right? Court rulings and all that.
Yes, and I said, we said we hoped to see, and I'm so glad.
That was a hope.
Yes.
Okay, so why do they need a reminder, Devoe?
They hardly do. It's on record. I mean, this administration is selective in its compliance with court judgments. Now, in this case, Monday Obani, a human rights lawyer, did file a suit at the Federal High Court to get the Ministry of Communication to more or less suspend or defray or postpone the deadline given to Nigerians to comply with the NIN registration, that's the national identity number.
Yes.
Now, he actually got that judgment passed. It was successful. And now he has written a letter to the Attorney General. There's not much of a story here. However, he's written a letter to the Attorney General, that's Abubakar Malami, to advise the Minister of Communication to comply with the judgment, all right? Saying that, because the suit was about that keeping that deadline, okay, which is whereby the Ministry of Communication has asked the telcos to block any number that had not registered with their NIN, that was a bit harsh, and that the implications amid a pandemic whereby we've had insufficient and inadequate registration points. So there's been a crowd and aggressive and hostile registration taking place nationwide. So this creates the optimal opportunity for the coronavirus spread. So the health concerns now have been given some relevance, and the suit is on ground. Now, what the suit does is that it extends the deadline, which was moved to April 6th, I think, by the minister and the National Assembly.
Yes.
If we take from the judgment, it should move the deadline 2 months forward, which would terminate sometime last week in May. I understand the minister has security concerns about the name registration. However, they need to balance this with the healthcare concerns of the pandemic. Nigerians need to be alive, or else if you kill them all in a bid to maintain your security, I don't think that we have enough vaccine currently to go around all Nigerians. So I think they need to be careful in the execution of this name registration.
Thank you so much, Devoe, because one of the some of the rights that he said it infringed upon was the constitutionally guaranteed right to freedom of expression, right to own movable property, and right to life. Tolagbe, the Guardian reports that representatives minority, or the minority caucus of the House of Representatives, has faulted a move to spend the $1.5 billion, the contentious $1.5 billion for
free
the
money
repairs of the Port Harcourt refinery. I mean, it sounds funny, but this is still going on. That was initially approved by the Federal Executive Council. But what do you hope to see by this new stance of the minority of the House of Representatives?
So the caucus is demanding an immediate review of the costs. They are urging the presidency not to release funds until the review is completed, because they are arguing that a critical cost analysis indicates that there is and I quote, a huge scam and a ploy by unscrupulous elements to hide under the guise of rehabilitation of the refinery to siphon public funds. So what they are saying is that this is just another indication of what they call a prevailing unpatriotic proclivity. I love this, of treasury looting and criminal diversion of public funds.
To mean corruption, eh?
No, yeah, and they just can't understand how $1.5 billion, which belongs to all Nigerians, is to be funneled towards rehabilitation of a non-profitable refinery. Now, you see, I take issue with the issue of with the use of profitable, because I would argue that profit is not actually the initial goal. We're talking about functional. How functional is it? How many barrels is it able to refine? Because you see, we're talking about, it's funny how everyone talks about the security of NIN and so on and so on. No one talks about the fact, the security of having to import all the petrol and diesel and the fuel that we require in a country which has severe power challenges. So it's crazy how sometimes security applies to one sector, but doesn't apply to a more fundamental sector. So beyond profit, I think the argument should be more about the functionality, the capacity, what additional capacity is this proposed refurbishment going to add? Where are they now? And I think the call for transparency is right. The caucus is going one step further and asking them to ask private organizations who want to invest in that. You see, rather than fixing your old broken down ones over and over again, why aren't you inviting the private sector in, to do more in this space?
Like a bidding process, yes?
Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you for that, Tolagbe. Although unfortunately we might not have enough time to go into the next stories, but I'll quickly run through some messages before we wrap up. Ken here says, "Good morning, all. The Buhari government." Okay, all right. There's a lot of knocks there. Sam from Ikeja says, "Please let the government fix infrastructures. This automatically generates employment. We're not in a war with any country, so why increase the workforce in the Nigerian army and police when they are not properly taken care of at the moment?" Sen says the issue with Tinubu's statement is not that the army is understaffed, is that the army is not a revenue generating unit. Why not encourage IT development? Yinka says NNPC, DPR, CBN work, they work, they won't call us so, but if it's Empower, lawman, and soldier work, they are going to call us. Okay. Tayo says Femi Adesina said that we should not always look at the negative. I wonder why what the president saw before embarking on this tourist adventure. Or am I seeing something different? Shegun says there will be no salvation concerning foreign medical trips for presidents and their families, whichever party wins in 2023. Are the alternatives better? Guys, let's get used to it. Special thanks to you, Devoe Okorie, for being here. As always, thank you so much. Tolagbe Martins is at tolagbe.com. Devoe is at Devoe Okorie. Check out any part of this show or this conversation that you've missed. Go to youtube.com/smooth981